The name's Nick O. Now don't you whinge. I got OG Sand style that'll make you cringe. Old white man, my pants too tight, got rotten rhymes like potato blight. All right.
The very silly man you are.
I am, yes. All right. So welcome once again to Literary as Feck, the show where myself, Nicholas O'Sheacon, and himself,
Clive Davis. Sorry, I'm slightly flabbergasted. Although relieved, you didn't do blackface at least.
No, I thought that might be a step too far.
Although Justin Trudeau seems to have got away with it several times,
and is Prime Minister of our nation, or of my nation. So this week, this is the show where we talk about books, and we're talking about a book by Jeff Chang called Can't Stop. Thank you for reminding me what it's called there. Can't Stop, Won't Stop, A History of Hip Hop.
Well, actually, it's a history of the hip hop generation.
Okay.
And I'm thinking this might actually be, because by the time I got to the end of the book, I'm wondering if this might be important kind of to specify that title as opposed to a history of hip hop. Because
I think so. That might explain part of my own misunderstanding of what I was getting into when I recommended the book.
Right.
This is a recommendation from me. I'd never read it before, and I wanted to read some kind of primer or primer. I can't remember which one it is. Primer. On hip hop, partly because it's something I don't know enough about.
Yes, we know because you just did that intro.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. My skills be weak, man. So
digging this hole deeper and deeper.
I have Trinidadian relatives. I'm sure I'll get a pass from them for that whole thing there. And that's one of the exciting things about reading the book was the realization of how much Caribbean culture kind of influences and kind of weaves its way into hip hop. And it was something I knew a little bit about, the soca connection to hip hop, and the whole like diss rap thing of like, and the whole freestyle thing. They didn't go into that too much in the book. My understanding is a lot of that stuff was going on with these Lord whoever's and down in places like Trinidad and in Jamaica and stuff. But anyway, so I wanted to read a book that was going to teach me all about hip hop, and we'll talk in a second about whether this was actually the book that I was looking for. It may not, but I don't regret having read this. I felt like I learned a bunch. I felt I learned a bunch, and it sent me off in various things. And what it really did more than anything was made me aware of some of the gaps that I could start to fill, like even just going back and watching something like Style Wars, the documentary about the graffiti scene of the early 80s, which is an amazing documentary, and I just hadn't seen.
Right.
So
mentioning this book came out in 2005 as well, so I think that's another thing to maybe it is to consider as well, that
and it hasn't been updated.
In the interim, I mean, isn't there I can't remember what it's called, isn't there a Netflix series which is the history of hip-hop music as well, and there's some other good documentaries that come out in the interim which are a bit more focused specifically on the music. And plus as well, watching those documentaries, you can hear the music and see people doing stuff as well. So I'm wondering if it's specifically that you're after. That might be.
That's what I feel like now that I've read the book. That's exactly what I think I actually wanted. And so, but it's been good. It's led me in the right directions. And I think. So I think we're done. I think we talked.
Yeah, that's it. So next time on.
That's basically all we need to say about.
Well, I did write a lot of notes, but again, it's like bullet points of things. I mean, I think it. So all right.
Okay.
That's kind of
Shall I, do
treading
you want me to
on.
say something to fill the
Yeah,
space
why
here?
don't you do another one of your awesome raps?
I didn't write any more verses, sadly.
Oh, no.
I don't have
You
any more
can
science to drop.
freestyle, I'm sure.
Oh yeah. No, you know what? Actually, let's bring it back, because you know, I would love to see somebody do a documentary about this, but I don't think the footage would exist. But say like me, you're a kid in rural Ireland, circa 1982, circa 1983, and suddenly, like, you see on TV, like, the Beastie Boys, like, you got to fight for your right to party, or you see like the early Run DMC, the first stuff that really makes it to our like shores.
Right,
I mean, unless you were really hip to what was going on, the first kind of stuff. And then within weeks, you got kids down on top of the big, like, concrete water reservoir with bits of cardboard, like, doing backspins and stuff in rural Ireland, in a town of 6,000 people, you know, and in like Adidas tracksuits and stuff. And then people start doing graffiti, and, you know, somehow some people are pretty good at it. Like, the dissemination of like hip hop culture out of the Bronx to rural Ireland or rural Wales, or like, I'd love to see somebody do a documentary about like what the process was, and like interviews with those kids, like those 13-year-old like countryside Irish kids who were like, you know, I don't know, that that was my initial exposure to all of this.
Well, let's do that as an entry point then, because I have something to say about this, a little bit of history. So did you take to hip hop as a young person?
So that's a great question too. I was terrified. When I saw the Fight for Your Right to Party video, it scared the bejesus out of me. And the thing, like the line about your mom threw your best porno mags away, like that was just like, what are they even talking about? Like, I had a vague understanding of what that probably was about. But
I don't know what they're talking about, man. I don't know.
Exactly. And, you know, and then there was the whole thing. There was like, at the time in Ireland, there was hysteria over like not that there was that many BMWs in Ireland, but like getting their decals snapped off the top, you know, and put on like necklaces and stuff. And, you know, like it's the end of the world. Somehow this culture has come from the US to destroy the place. So yeah, I was scared. And then, you know, not that long after, I moved to Canada, and probably in 89 or 90, I started to, you know, and it probably through Ice-T. I think my friend Caleb was a fan of Ice-T, and so he lent me like the Freedom of Speech album, and it has a whole spoken word piece by Jello Biafra on it, that's done over the top of the whatever the rainy song is from the first Black Sabbath album, like it might just be called Black Sabbath, you know, the one that begins with the rain, the kind of guitar tone. And I was like, this is not the rap that I expected. Did not expect white nasally, you know, Jello Biafra over the top of Black Sabbath, and then we get into it, and the songs are great on that album. And then
that's I suppose that's getting into Ice-T's kind of metal period as well, though, isn't it? And
yeah, so Body Count comes not that long after that, for sure. But that's the album right before OG, which is the one where he suddenly starts to have metal on the albums. And then, you know, NWA, Public Enemy, that like a furiously fast, kind of intense, angry, and then with a political bent, because already by 15, 16, because of punk, I was interested in that side of things. And so that was kind of the rap that I gravitated towards. So I kind of missed the early Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five, and to some degree the Run DMC, and even the early Beastie Boys, because it just scared me. And then when I came in, it was at that period of more political kind of, or gangsta, I guess.
See, I had a total tenure for hip hop for the longest time. I couldn't get on with it at all. I suppose with the exception of the Beastie Boys, oddly enough, because they kind of seem to be odd outliers.
Well, in that they were a punk band first, right?
Yeah, but also there's just this something they do a little bit differently in a way, and I suppose it's more. I would hesitate to say it's not diluted, it's not watered down exactly. It's something a bit different. It's
its own thing. They've always reminded me of more coming down the line of like Dictators, Ramones, Beastie Boys in a weird way.
right,
with this rap thing going on.
But for some reason, yeah, hip hop didn't. I didn't get it for
Okay.
whatever reason. I started to enjoy it. I started to enjoy the instrumental side of it. Like I remember someone had a Dr. Octagon.
Oh yeah,
album,
well, I mean, Cool Keith.
Yeah,
that
but it's Cool Keith without the rapping,
Yes.
right? And for some reason, I could get into. For some reason, the rapping spoiled hip hop for me. I don't know why this is.
Okay.
Because I have no trouble with you know, which is the proto to all this, you know, Jamaican toasting.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I've always been a big reggae fan, and what they call the DJ there, which is, you know, the MC basically, and different versions and sound system versions, and I've never had a problem with that, but for some reason the US style, I could never get on with. It took a long time, and then yes, slowly via the instrumental versions of certain albums, and then when I finally got into, then I can't listen to the instrumental versions. I'm like, oh, there's something missing, you know.
Where's the
so for the past, I don't know, 15 years maybe, I've actually started to appreciate and gone back and listened to a lot of the early. There's a great I think I recommended this to you off air, Ego Trip. Put together an amazing kind of playlist for each year from 79 onwards, and that's a real steep learning curve if you listen to all of those.
Right.
And now, yeah, there's a lot of new hip hop by like people like Vince Staples and people like that. But it took me a long time to get on board with it, and it's weird. It's one of those things, like once you do, what was my problem?
Right. Yeah.
Before?
Yeah.
So you seem to have got into it to a certain extent earlier on when you were younger.
Yeah, but then it's all sort of been it's been a phases thing. Like I was into it for that period of time, and then I kind of fell away from it, and then I came back to it around the time I started hearing things like Cool Keith, you know. And my friend Ed, who writes for Marvel Comics, we've mentioned him before. He was always a huge hip hop fan right back into high school, and so he was a big fan of Cool Keith when Cool Keith was in the Ultramagnetics, you know. So he would, you know, I heard some of that stuff then, and he but then, you know, it would have been a bit later on that I would have heard the first Wu-Tang album, right? And then that was interesting because I was already at that point into, not so much into you know, Shaw Brothers and stuff, but I was more into Japanese stuff. But then there's an album, Liquid Swords, by the Jizza, which has all these samples from, here we go, ding ding ding, Lone Wolf and Cub, but the American dub, right? The Shogun Assassin dub. And
how are you gonna thread Thomas Millian into this?
I'm sure we'll get to Cuban rap at some point. So yeah, and then the Coup, which were, in a way, I don't know if you've heard much of the Coup, but they were like Public Enemy later on, in a way, like, but almost less racially focused and more class focused. Although they are black, but their rap was super class conscious, but really fun. It was like a mix of like Iceberg Slim, but this like heavy kind of communist bent, or you know. Anyway, their albums are awesome.
Yeah. So to bring it back to the book a little bit, I think if we're talking early years, and yes, kind of Cool Herc bringing the kind of Jamaican tradition over, and like you said, how it just hits like fertile ground and just you know, just grows exponentially out of all control, and clearly people were ready for this, right? Something whose moment had come, right? I think the book's good at doing those early years. I didn't necessarily learn that much because this is not that book's fault. It's because since this book has come out, that, like I said, there are all these other documentaries and stuff, and plus that coincided with my actual interest in hip hop for the first time. So
Mhm.
so a lot of this wasn't necessarily new for me, but I think it does a good job in these early chapters of balancing the actual music and
The larger
beat
culture.
boy scene,
Yeah.
but also putting it in a cultural context and a socio-political context and stuff like that.
And I
Where
guess that was a
because
surprise for me. I think I assumed the book would be more, and as you pointed out, the title isn't, this is not a book about hip hop as so much as
hip-hop
it is
generation,
as about, a moment in time and a moment in culture and a moment in politics. And so that was surprising to me that there was so much information I learned about just how the Bronx developed and then degraded, I guess, right? How it was let to just kind of rot.
Yeah.
I mean, things we all know from watching movies like Escape from the Bronx, and so on, right?
Yes, right. And then they even had to send Snake Plissken in to save the president's daughter at one point in the early 80s, I believe. I'm a bit hazy, but something like that.
Yeah. Henry Silva was running around there in a silver suit at one point.
Which is never good.
Fighting Mark Gregory. So all kinds of stuff is going down.
Vic Morrow with his flamethrower.
Yeah. So that was interesting. And as you said, like, it did a good job of actually going right back to, talking about Lee Scratch Perry and that kind of, the reggae kind of, so I thought it did a good job of setting the groundwork and kind of making it more understandable where some of the stuff pops out of, and then focusing lots on the graffiti culture and lots on the breakdancing as well as the music.
Yeah. So one thing I was surprised they only mentioned the last poets in passing. There wasn't much. I thought there'd be more about the last poets. Who are kind of, I suppose you could argue, with a kind of original American hip hop group in a way. But there's very little about the last poets. I thought that was a strange omission.
Yeah, there's a few places where I was like that. They kind of he kind of elides over certain things that seem like, and then one of the big criticisms of the book from people within like the music industry was like, why does he devote so much time to talking about like Source magazine and like rap journalism? Because they kind of felt like that was like.
We'll get to that a bit later on, because I just want to focus on these early, because a few things are quite interesting jumped out at me. It was quite interesting putting into context how, what's considered, if you don't consider the last poet, but the first commercial, if you talk about Rapper's Delight. It's quite interesting to me how this was the way he puts it. In a way, it's a bunch of carpetbaggers come along and totally steal the thunder. Of, they were all, I don't know, they were all like butchers or handlers or something, and they decided to make a hip hop record. And and it just totally blew up. And the thing is, and this is interesting as well, a comparison to make, another a carpetbagging figure is Malcolm McLaren.
Oh yeah, that's great. Album. I had forgotten to some degree about that, but I remember again, my friend Ed had for a while had a girlfriend who was quite a snobby punk rocker, and they got in a huge argument on a road trip when she brought up Malcolm McLaren, and Ed's only context for him was like, oh yeah, like the Buffalo Girls rapper guy or whatever, and she was like, she didn't believe him that Malcolm McLaren had a hip hop career at all, and was furious. Like, what are you talking about? Like, he was like, no, seriously, like I have the tape in the back of the car. And,
it's a swindle.
Yes.
But the interesting thing about those two records, in a way, though, both Rappers like and Buffalo Girls, is yes, they certainly are guilty of. I have to admit, I'm not overly familiar with the entire Duck Rock album.
Right.
I do know Buffalo Girls, obviously. Of course, Eminem kind of covered it as well.
Yes. Yeah.
But they're both really good records. That's the thing.
Oh yeah. Yeah, for sure.
So that's kind of interesting as well. More so in a way, like some of the other stuff, which is more important, like stuff like African Bambaata's Planet Rock, for example, stuff like that.
Yes, yeah.
That stuff, not to take away from its importance, but it's not necessarily aged so well, because now it just sounds, because now we are more connected and everyone knows all, you're just thinking, oh, that's just craft work. That's just,
yes,
you know,
yeah.
And so it just seems a little bit more, I don't know, some things just, you know, they're important when they're new, and then they just don't take well, and then other things do, even though if they have slight less cultural validity, I guess.
I can remember watching Much Music, which is the Canadian MTV, and this was again like early high school, just moved to Canada, and they would have like occasionally they'd have like a throwback thing, and I remember seeing the video for the Grandmaster Flash and the Furious 5, the one that's, you know, I think it's The Message. I think it's,
yes.
it's like, yeah, and just
great
being
record.
Like,
great record.
Yeah, and just being like, this is awesome, like totally everything. The video is awesome, the song is awesome, like the chorus, you know, sometimes I wonder how I keep from going under. Like it was just a totally
rats in the front room, roaches in the back, junkies in the alley with a baseball bat.
Oh,
it's great.
It's like, you know,
yeah.
So that, you know, and I think that's kind of the era that I'm interested in maybe going back. I'd really like to listen to more of that first couple of years and sort of see what's the most interesting stuff that's going on. Like I said,
those Ego Trip collections,
okay,
brilliant starting point, because they've got all the stuff you'd expect, but they also have a lot of what the hell is this now, like real oddities from that era, which are kind of more fascinating than the hits sometimes.
So what did you think? Because quite early in the book too, there's the whole big section on the Bronx Gangs, right? Which that was stuff that I didn't actually know that much about. And it reminded me of that book we had read not that long ago, the Manhunt one, with all those JD stories in it, you know?
Right.
And I was right back to that kind of like warriors come out and play, you know, the Flying Cut Sleeves. I did watch some of the documentary, the Flying Cut Sleeves, that you sent the link to, you know, and I'd like to see the rest of it, because it definitely, what little I watch of it piques my curiosity for sure.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if I can find here. There's a great, I really like, there's an illustration early on of, oh, here we go. The Gangs of the Bronx, 1970 to 1970.
Yes, the map.
That's fascinating. You can't really read it there on this, but yeah, basically you've got the, up in Tremont, you've got the Golden Guineas, the Cawthorn Cats, the Javelins, the Reapers, Savage Skulls. Down in the Bronx, you got another Savage Skulls chapter, Bachelors, Peacemakers, Saints. This is fascinating.
Yeah, and it makes the Warriors movie make more sense, although they're obviously over the top in the way they dress. But basically, that there was this period when New York and the Bronx was a kind of, you didn't go from neighborhood to neighborhood because you just didn't know.
What's fascinating, what I found really interesting about that in this book was how it places that stuff actually like there was more gang activity in decades prior to.
Absolutely. And if anything, it seemed like hip hop and b-boying and graffiti even became peacemaking tools, and they kind of got people out of the just killing each other and fighting each other and mugging each other.
The 50s and the 60s would have been a lot more risky in terms of going into the wrong territory, or, you know, stuff like that. Of course, there were probably less guns on the streets there, so there would have been more stabbings and stuff like that, but still, I mean, you know, you don't want to be stabbed. I mean,
no, not at all.
Not even a little bit.
No, that whole section was really good, and really interesting, and as I said, and then all the stuff about graffiti, which is funny that's also, again, I remember, you know, probably that documentary Style Wars was recommended to me like 20 or 30 years ago by my friend Tavis, and it was just like, oh yeah, I'll get to it, and I riveted that thing.
It's good. I didn't get a chance to rewatch it for this, but I remember seeing it back in the day. Yes, Style Wars is really good, and then from a more like a kind of a semi-fictional narrative, Wild Style is
which is also really good and really gritty and looks, you know, and and that guy Cap, that douchebag who goes around just like covering everyone else's stuff up with his name, like, and just so bad, like,
I think that's where this book peaks for me in terms of putting it all together in a nice package.
I felt the Bronx stuff was the best. By the time it gets to the West Coast,
when it gets to Debbie Harry, singing Fab Five Freddy is really fly or whatever. Like that stuff is okay. And and the whole
David Bowie showing up, and you know, I mean, there is, but I mean, you know, that
there's
was
good stuff in there, and it's just for me that's where this book kind of like it's got a solid like it would almost have been better if he'd fleshed out like a book just on that scene, a little bit. I quite like the fact there's one little nugget where he points out that Debbie Harry was like the most graffitied girl or something
that shows up in Star Wars as well. Like there's all these beautiful paintings of her.
She was smoking hot. So I kind of get it.
Yeah. So sorry, you've literally now set my mind to video. I'm Videodrome. My mind is
man. Okay. No, but I've always been a big fan as well, just in general, slight tangent, because I like the way that they did play with, because the thing is, a lot of Blondie's records are really fucking great as well.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
I love the fact that they totally played with that from the beginning. They played with her image. They totally went for they weren't coy about it.
No.
But it's backed up.
The music is great too.
Brilliant music, and lots of different types as well. Styles, like you listen to the first, is it called Parallel Lines? The first Blondie album, and it's got all that weird stuff like the invasion of the Ant-Men or whatever, and people playing sex. But then you've got like stone fucking disco classics like Heart of Glass, right? Which is As soon as that starts, if you listen to that on a good sound, like a boom, 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 whatever, you're like anyway. And she's cute. Anyway, and that's Blondie love for now.
All right.
So I think it kind of peaks there, right? If the rest of the book was as
that energy,
good, then I would.
But I think he's chosen to write a kind of a survey, like maybe, I mean, not even maybe, but definitely bitten off more than he could chew, because then we do move to the West Coast. We're dealing with NWA and Ice Cube, and then we're dealing with there's the fairly lengthy section on Public Enemy, which makes sense, but then kind of getting into the nitty gritty of
some of the Public Enemy stuff was quite interesting. Again, it depends on how much maybe other people, if they were as familiar with that stuff as I was with the earlier stuff, then maybe it wasn't as. But I didn't know the whole controversy about the anti-Semitic.
Oh, Griff. Okay, yeah. I was very much aware of it at the time. Yeah.
Right, I wasn't.
It was a bit of a black eye for the band, because they had, the very strong anti-racist thing, and then.
Right.
But what I didn't know, actually, I didn't know that the three of them, like that Chuck D was kind of this weird intermediary between Griff and Flavor Flav, and that like Flavor Flav was specifically basically, you are the jester, I am the guy in the middle, and he is the almost military Black Panther dude who unfortunately had some not great opinions that he shared with the media over and over again.
Well, it's interesting. It's something that comes in a little bit towards the end of the book as well, is and I think this is obviously more problematic now. So a lot of, if you follow the kind of the Afrika Bambaataa sort of what's the word, the autodidactic route, right? Yes. Which I followed myself. I mean, I didn't go on to university, for example, and that's why I'm an idiot. No, but there's a certain thing, there's a danger, like I'm not just because I followed that route myself, but a lot of people, I have a great admiration for the autodidactic, and of course you can do both, right? After you leave higher education, you can carry on. You don't have to stop reading. No, exactly. But the thing, the one danger that potentially comes through with, and a little bit of knowledge is a dangerous thing, is without someone to maybe structure your learning or to teach you basic critical learning skills, you can very easily get caught up in conspiracy theories. Conspiracy theory, yeah. And it seems to be more and more an issue. I'll put my hand up. I will out myself. Once upon a time, to my great shame, I was a little bit of a 9/11 truther, and wasn't quite sure if we'd gone to the moon and all that bullshit. And clearly, I just hadn't had proper, skills for how to read the media and you know, and then once you kind of it clicks into place, then it's not that difficult to pass. But
yes, yeah.
But it's interesting that a lot of these people who have gone that route of you know, doing it for yourselves and the autodidactism, it is interesting how a lot of these figures have gone down those
wandered up into conspiracy,
and plus
sure.
on top of that, you're talking if people like me, who I don't come from a privileged background, but I certainly don't come from a oppressed background either, right? So it's one thing for someone like me to foment a certain amount of conspiracy theory, but if you grow up in a certain condition where, you know, you look around and you're like, you know what, it does look like they're out to get
yeah.
If the cops are fucking beating you up, or you know,
you're
then
seriously alienated.
it's even more easy to kind of forgive why someone might buy into that.
Yes, no. So yeah, that, as I said, that section was interesting because I didn't really know about the interpersonal dynamics of the band at all. I kind of knew a little bit about the public image of the band, but yeah, not about their, and that was really like just like Griff kicking, you know, Flavor Flav in the chest and stuff. Just like, I was like, whoa, there was obviously like they were not a bunch of friends. They were
not that I want to highlight those fucking assholes over at Film Crack. Whatever they're called, Clump and Nunk or something. So,
yeah, that's the one.
But when I was reading about the summer of '89, Yusuf Hawkins, Bensonhurst kind of section of the book.
Oh yes.
You know, you literally you know, have you know, the Bensonhurst citizens like fucking
lynching, basically, like
close
lynching.
to proper lynching. That whole stuff in Spike of Bensonhurst the film would have come out the year before, but it's because I think when we were those assholes, were watching talking about Spike of Bensonhurst, I think there was a slight kind of
in a way I disconnected it.
It was more cartoonish and we gave it more the benefit of the doubt.
Yes, but there's definitely racism. We talked about the racism though in it, and the whole kind of like white man's burden.
Yeah, but I think we were slightly forgiving of it, I think, because we were thinking it was Paul Morrissey kind of trolling to a certain extent, which it was.
Yes.
But then when you put in context with this, you're like, oh, that's slightly less funny.
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, I didn't realize that things were that. I mean, I have a sense of things always being kind of ugly.
No, I was shocked. I was actually
racially, but that was pretty crazy. Yeah,
because you by that you expect maybe some racial slurs being, but you don't expect necessarily rampaging.
Yeah, gangs of white youths killing people. Yeah, no, it was awful. So, yeah. And as I said, but no, I for me the book, you know, like and maybe it was because I probably wanted to know more about the West Coast as well, and I felt like I got a bit of short shrift when it came to that. And then, you know, I didn't necessarily care that much about the whole Biggie Smalls Tupac thing, but it felt like for somebody who wanted a history of like North American hip hop and rap, it was really barely touched on.
And odd, isn't it?
It seems like a big deal.
It's odd what he includes and what he doesn't, because on the one hand, he seems to be on this level and you're thinking everything's going to be in there, but not. I think it's just about mentioned, throwaway in one side. And to be honest, from my point of view, I'm glad it wasn't in there, just because I've read so much about it everywhere else,
right?
And I'm kind of a bit bored of that story, to be honest. But then on the other hand, from his point of view, I'm thinking, well, why isn't this? It's an odd omission, and that's what I mean. I think the second half of the book, or last 2/3, or it really goes into this weird grab bag mode and almost totally forgets about the music for a while.
Yes.
Like,
well, as I said, the lengthy asides about the business of like the rap sheets, basically, and which then become the magazines, and like the whole internal internecine, however you say that word, strife at know. And
but even before that, like the stuff the stuff about NWA was quite interesting, and really interesting history of Watts as well.
Yes.
Like that was very interesting to me. I didn't realize, like I knew about the Watts riots and stuff, but I didn't know about how basically it's basically kind of the bottom of the basin where it's the place everything's shit's gonna roll downhill. I didn't realize all that. It was interesting. But again, I don't know if it belongs in this book necessarily. It was fascinating. That was so fascinating. And then
I will say I did like all those. I mean, it was interesting for me whether it belongs in the book or not, but all the stuff about the kind of because it made more sense to me. I remember the whole Korean black kind of strife, and then particularly Ice Cube having these songs that seemed like just like what's that about? Like seemed crappy to me at the time.
On the music side, it's quite interesting, and then it goes. But then when it goes more into the post Rodney King and what was her name, Letitia Harlins, and the 92 LA riots and stuff. Again, I understand you can't really avoid that, but again, in the interim, there was that surprisingly excellent LA 92 Netflix series about I don't know if you saw that.
No.
Very, very, very. Okay. So again, I don't want to blame the book for things that have come out since then. It's not the book's fault, but it's odd, isn't it? It's difficult to pass what like should be there and what shouldn't be there, and then it just kind of sometimes it goes into that for pages and pages and pages, and then there's just a like almost I forgot to mention some music and then suddenly it mentions a bit of music, and then you're back into so it's an odd one, but like you said, I am glad to have read it. I wasn't bored by any of it, and I didn't feel any of it was a waste of time at all. But I mean, we are here to review the book, right? So
it's a mixture. I think if I mean, it seems as though, because I looked into it, it doesn't seem like anybody's written anything since that is as broad in its broad strokes, right? There's a lot of books dealing with specific moments. But I am interested in, like, I mean, I'd like to read the Wu-Tang book actually at some point. But the only other thing I would say is that I wonder if Ed Piskor's The Hip Hop Family Tree series of graphic novels, which is considered to be one of the best works on hip hop, maybe isn't a thing to follow this with later on. We may even want to do that later on.
I'll be up for that. I mean,
I think it's the Fantagraphics thing.
Sorry, I just realized I figured out because an example of what I'm talking about. So there's the whole thing about the LA riots and all that, and all the strife between African Americans and the Korean Americans, and then there's literally like a bit where it just goes, and Cypress Hill had made an album that spoke of this, and then it's gone again. Oh, is that all we're going to get about
Cypress Hill?
Cypress Hill.
Apparently so.
And there's another whole part as well where it's like it feels like an addition to the beginning of a chapter. It's obviously he's forgotten about it and gone back and shoehorned it in. It's like there's a chapter which is totally nothing to do with that. Starts off talking about the Washington go-go scene, which is interesting. Right. But it's just, it really feels like, where does this? Yeah, maybe.
Right.
There we go. So, and again, I don't mean to be churlish, but that is it is a weird kind of.
I mean, I think his defense was because I think he has been attacked from various perspectives on the book, and his thing is like it's a history of the hip hop generation. It's not the history. Right. It's mine, right? So like please
I suppose
please write your own, basically. You're invited to fill in the gaps and weight it differently than I weighted it.
I think even though there are structural problems with the book, I think what saves it and makes it worth a read, for me at least, is there are enough insights here and there and interesting little nuggets and stories so that are worth There's one section towards the end which I found really interesting about, I forget the details exactly, but basically someone who grew up in LA, the child of Salvadorian immigrants, and who had got caught up with the MS-13.
Right. Yes.
And then ends up getting deported. And as soon as he turns up in San Salvador, the first thing he sees is MS-13 graffiti on a wall. And it's kind of fascinating how, the United States has exported all these elements, kind of been fermented in and then sent
exported back to their home countries.
Another gift to the world. So little things like that are they're interesting, valid points, which so it's an interesting. Was this his first book? It feels kind of like someone desperate to say so many things.
Yes, I think so, and I think he'd written articles for magazines and stuff before, but
first big.
Well, I think if like me, you hadn't, I haven't seen like the various documentaries made recently, the various Netflix series made recently, and if you were looking for like, I'll equate it to this. So in grade 12, which is the last year of high school in the US and Canada, I took a course, like a world history course that basically was 1900 to, at that point, the then present day of the early 90s, right? And it was an elective course, meaning you didn't have to take it. But it kind of blows my mind that it's not a required course, because basically it gives you a grounding for understanding roughly where we're at. Obviously you can go further back and get a deeper and different understanding, but without an understanding of World War I, World War II, the Arab-Israeli conflict, the domino theory of communism, Russia's invasion of Afghanistan, like a lot of the world doesn't make a lot of sense. And for me, this was a survey course. This was like a first year university, like, oh, I'm going to take Rap 101. All right, get out my binder and my dividers. And so in that way, I think for somebody who is interested and wants to get a kind of an overview, and then they can start exploring specific areas, or if they know a little bit, but they're like, oh, that's interesting. There wasn't anything about this one thing I wanted to know more about. Like there was very little about the Wu-Tang Clan.
Are they even mentioned?
I feel like maybe near the end.
Index.
I feel like they are, but I think they're given very short shrift. I feel like
there's two Wu-Tang Clan on page 427 and 437.
Yeah, and they feel to me. I mean, I know it's because I'm coming from a fan basis,
Right.
And Cool Keith as well. There's a little bit, but not enough, because I can always have more Cool Keith. Any of the videos and stuff, like he sells DVDs and stuff like at his concerts that you can buy from him, including homemade pornography and stuff. Like Cool Keith's just awesomely awesome in all kinds of ways. But he has, I remember with this one DVD I had of his where he does this whole bit about explaining that he has nothing in his house but pork rinds and like tonic water, because like when you get to a certain level of like fame or money, everyone just comes to your house and wants to eat out of your fridge, and nobody will touch pork rinds or tonic water. So he opens his fridge in his house and that's all that's in there. So yeah, I would have liked a bit more about Cool, but then I know where to go for that stuff. But I appreciated that somebody put the time in to give me this gloss on the history of hip hop.
Yeah, no, I think we're both predominantly favorable towards it, and clearly we're not. I didn't have a chance to look up the reviews of it actually after, but it was interesting. Clearly, we're not the first people to have
taken issue with the specific things.
The kind of structural problems of the book. But anyway, so Nick, do you have another rap to take us out of the show?
Sadly, I don't. I was hoping that you would have prepared something to finish us off.
Thank fuck for that.